but he was working on X-Files, which at the time had this huge rabid fan base. And he talked about being out in the middle of the woods at 2 a.m. and fans popping up that had found out where they were going to be filming, and they were just waiting on them to show up and so they could see the action. And I have to imagine that with a show like The Walking Dead, you've had similar things.
Well, we've had, it's died down a good bit. I'll be honest with you. It's become less rabid. It was really hot and heavy in the first 7 seasons of the show. And then I'd say 8, the first 7 to 8 seasons. And then it started to taper off. So it's dropped off a little bit, but there's still a very rabid fan base out there. And, but the way that we're not as open, we're not out in public as much as we used to be. We're in our controlled environments. But when we are out in public, we will get some people find us. But it's not, in the early years, though, it was quite weird, because when we were shooting in Alexandria, early in season 4, I guess it was, we were shooting at night, and a large crowd had shown up during the day. It just kept getting built. It was building, getting bigger and bigger. The word had gotten out that we were going to be filming.
Locations, go to 2.
Go for locations. Hello, I'm Mike Riley, and I'm the supervising location manager on The Walking Dead, waiting on season 11 to crank up. You're listening to Locations on 2.
And this is Dodd Vickers, your host for Locations on 2, the podcast taking you behind the scenes with location professionals working on all types of productions around the world. Visit us online at locationson2.com. For more about me, visit doddvickers.com. Locations on 2 is brought to you by the Location Managers Guild International. The LMGI is a global organization of location professionals working in the film, television, and commercial industries. To find out more, visit them online at locationmanagers.org. My guest on this episode of the podcast is location manager Mike Riley. Mike's a veteran location manager with credits that include Oh Brother, Where Art Thou and Sweet Home Alabama, but most people know him now for his work on The Walking Dead. He's done 125 plus episodes to date, including the pilot, and has a lot to share about this show, how it's evolved, how it's developed, and the relationship they have with the town where it's filmed. Let's flip on over to the back channel where the work gets done on set, Locations on 2. Unlike a lot of the people that we've talked to on the podcast, you and I both grew up in the metropolitan Atlanta area, but for the life of me, I can't remember where you told me that you
I grew up in the Decatur area.
That's right.
Lived there during my high school years and whatnot, but I was actually I lived in East Atlanta up until I was about 4 years old, and my parents moved out to DeKalb County. Then I wound up settling over near Decatur in that part of DeKalb County.
I know you worked with your dad growing up a little bit, and what did your dad do again?
My dad was he had his own business. He was a distributor for an industrial engines company, large national company that supplied industrial engines parts and service to places like the Atlanta airport. And back in the day, a lot of the mill construction, forklifts, that sort of stuff. He was in that business for about 35 years. Prior to that, he worked in the auto parts industry.
And what I was remembering was you telling me or saying something about learning a lot about Atlanta and where things were and kind of the back corners and nooks and crannies of the metropolitan area, working with your dad when you were growing up. Is that right?
That's part of it for sure. But also growing up here was, and the fact that I worked at the film office for about 7.5 years, that was, we did a lot of scouting and became familiar with a lot of areas, not just around the metro area, but statewide that have kind of been logged in my memory about where places are and things of that nature.
Well, and that's kind of why I was, I always ask this question of everyone, but, when you're growing up, did you have dreams of being in the film industry? Any idea at all that you'd end up doing what you're doing now and be involved in this business?
Well, it's funny because I would have never believed I would be working in the film industry. I I really had no desire to. I mean, it wasn't a goal of mine to go to film school, or I mean, it wasn't even something I was even considering.
Right.
My life just led me to it. I mean, it was just a series of events that led me to this industry, and that's how I got into it. When I got out of high school, I went to junior college for a little bit. That didn't work out so well. Then I wound up getting drafted in May of 1969 and went into the service for a couple of years.
Oh, I didn't realize
I was very
that.
fortunate. I didn't have to go to Vietnam. I wound up going to Germany instead. While I was in Europe, I picked up photography as a hobby, carried that with me back to civilian life, and went to school down at what's now called the University of West Georgia. Went to school there and got a degree in criminal justice.
Oh, I had no idea. I didn't expect that at all.
With an emphasis in a sociology degree with an emphasis in criminal justice, and then I took a journalism class as my minor. That was my minor focus. And when I got out of college, I wound up working in journalism, and also worked as a freelance photographer for a friend of mine who opened a photography studio, and he and I worked together. And I transitioned over into photojournalism and did that up until the late 70s, early 80s, and then I took the job with the state in the tourism office as a photographer for them, and segued over into the film division, and that's how I got into film. When I spent the 7 years working with the director at that time was Norm Bielowitz, and I worked with him and another lady by the name of Lynn Foster. It was an office of three. We, worked with film production companies when they came into Georgia during that period of time, which was, it's kind of a boom era for us because we had a lot of uptick in the filming industry here. We had Driving Miss Daisy come in. We had numerous projects, Glory, lots of television. Matlock was one of the series that came in and lasted for a while. Heat of the Night was in here. Sure. So I had a lot of experience working with producers, location managers, production designers. I would escort them around the state, introduce them to the various people they needed to interact with, Department of Natural Resources, Department of Transportation, various city governments, whatnot. Spent a lot of time in the van with taking folks around and just kind of listening and absorbing what the industry was about. In '89, I decided that I didn't want to stay in state government any longer. And I left for about a year, did a little something else. I worked with my dad for a little bit, decided that I would start freelancing. So in 90 and 91, I started to freelance, first as a scout and then transitioned into location management in 91.
I have to think that the industry has changed quite a bit since what it was like when you're in that era that you're talking about, because the shows you described that were coming at that point seem incredibly and very Southern centric, whereas we're getting a lot more diversity, a lot more of Atlanta and the Georgia playing for other places. So I assume it's changed quite a bit.
It shot. We did one of my favorite shows was very enlightening. Was Invasion USA, which was a Chuck Norris thing.
I remember that. Yeah.
And we, that brought a lot of attention to the state. Oddly enough, I mean, it doesn't sound like it would, but because of the scope of what they did, they shot down on the coast and back up to the Atlanta area. They actually shot in Florida for a little bit, and I don't know that they ever went to Savannah. I know we scouted for it, but they shot a segment down in Miami, and then the rest of it was shot up here in Atlanta. And it was one of the biggest, logistical shows that we'd had in for a long time. We had we had the National Guard helping with military stuff and, helicopters and tanks.
Right.
All that kind of stuff. And that was a big show, and it brought a lot of attention to say, well, look what they were able to do in the city of Atlanta. And after that, it was kind of interesting. We started getting a lot of shows that wanted to do some other things, that were not necessarily Southern oriented. So but it was a kind of a boom period there for about that 8 years. And oddly enough, we had a governor at the time that wasn't very film friendly, and which made our job a little bit of a challenge for getting people to come in here when you have a governor that says he's not real
for sure
keen on the industry. But fortunately, we had a gentleman by the name of George Berry, who was the Commissioner of Industry and Trade, who realized this was something that they wanted to nourish, and he kind of had our back while we were in that era, and it helped a lot to keep the business coming in. So, but I started freelancing in 1991, and the first year I was freelancing, I said, well, this was a good move. You know, I'm making more money than I was making at the state.
Right.
And I said, this is good. And then all of a sudden, Canada hit, and the Canadian incentive where they did the incentive that not only the exchange on the dollar, but they also gave them a good break on the taxes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all your television movies, primarily TV, which was the bread and butter for us here
right
at the time in that era, that all started going to Canada. And then because we would have on average probably a dozen TV projects in here every year, and then we have 4 to 5 features. So the crew here locally kind of cut their teeth on the TV side, and that was and when that went away, that was a big hit. I mean, it shut us down for a while. So my second year, I actually at freelancing, I made less money working in the film industry than I did working at the state. So I had to kind of adapt to stay alive. So I moved over to the commercial side, which was still pretty busy here. And still is. People don't realize, I don't think, maybe some people, but there's always been a good commercial production center here.
Yeah,
and
I've done a few myself.
So I did commercials for a while, and I did some still. I even worked on still shoots with a guy by the name of Herb Ritz, who was a big photographer back in that period of time.
Oh, sure, I know Herb. My brother did.
Yeah, and did some still shoots, catalog stuff for people. I did whatever I could do to, keep the money flowing. And was able to survive that lean period. Then we came back to work, and then on the first feature I ever worked on, we were about halfway through that, and things were picking back up. We were doing well, and then the Teamsters had an issue internally here in Georgia of who had jurisdiction within the Atlanta area and across the state, and they boycotted the show I was on.
Oh, which show were you working on at that point?
It was the Real McCoy.
Oh yeah, it's Val Kilmer and
an epic cult film that you make and catch late at night occasionally. It had Kim Basinger and Val Kilmer in it.
Yeah,
and it was.
I remember seeing it.
It was the first feature I'd ever done, and I did it cheap because I wanted to get a feature under my belt. And myself and John Finley worked on that show.
Was John your assistant?
He was my assistant, and it was only us. It was me and him. Oh. And we had no PA. We had no coordinator, because those coordinators didn't exist back then. There was no such thing as a location coordinator. So the two of us basically worked 7 days a week for very little money. On a show that was very complicated, and we got through it. But we had helicopters, we had MARTA, we had all kinds of stuff we had to do. But that was the first feature. And when the Teamster thing hit, that threw a big wet blanket on top of everything else again. So that killed us for about almost a full year. I mean, it wasn't directed at the producers because it was an internal struggle between the unions, the two jurisdictions.
Oh, okay.
But when they struck the show, of course, nobody crossed the picket line, and they lost a full day of production on that show because of that till they could get everything back. And the producer on that show guy by the name of Lou Stroller, who is out of New York, and a gentleman by the name of Marty Bregman.
I do know who Marty Bregman was.
Yeah, they were very had a lot of influence in the industry, and that put a really bad taste in their mouth. And Lou told us, he said, "I'm never coming back." Mm-hmm. He said, "I'll never come back because of this," and he has never come back. That kind of thing. Those type of things can really affect a market in a very negative way. And so anyway, that's a story sort of got off track there, but you were asking. But
no, not at all, because, I know John very well, and I've never heard that story from him. I didn't know that he had started off at that point with you on that movie.
Oh, yeah. He worked with me for several years as an assistant, and we did several shows together. And then he finally, I kept trying to kick him out. I said, "Look, John," I said, you're good enough to, manage. I said, "You need to get out there and manage." And he was a little reluctant to do it, but eventually he did. And of course, he's been managing for a couple of decades now. So he's
a good guy.
Been in the business for a long time too.
I was trying to remember what the first film I think I stumbled across filming in Atlanta was, and as far as I can remember, it was this weird science fiction movie called Free Jack, and I think that
Free Jack shot in they were shooting in 90, I think it was.
That sounds about right.
89 or 90. That was a big show. I had just left the film office when that started, and that was also another big show that they shot in Metro Atlanta.
Yeah, I was working downtown, and I remember seeing all these crazy science fiction style tanks running around the streets of the downtown in Five Points and all over down the underground in that area.
That's sort of the backstory on how I got into the business. I mean, it wasn't planned. It just my life has always kind of been that way, where events lead me to something. Like I said, I never would have thought. The reason I went to work at the state in the first place was I was trying to get on as a photographer with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and they weren't hiring. So I wound up taking the job at the state, thinking that was going to be temporary. Mm-hmm. And while I was, trying to get on with the paper, and then one thing led to another. The newspaper thing never evolved, and I wound up staying with the state, and that's how I wound up in the film office. And that's how I wound up in the industry. If I'd have got hired at the Journal-Constitution, I probably wouldn't have been working in the film business.
Yeah, I think to date, I don't think there's one person that I've talked to that was their goal, that they wanted to get into the film industry. It seems like most people that work in locations have a pretty diverse background in other things and other lives before they find themselves in the film industry.
I mean, it's pretty common to have that happen. I mean, you're right about that. I know a lot of managers that were doing other things. A lot of people in the business, just like yourself. You were in the hotel business.
Right.
Steve Minch, who's now out at Tyler Perry, he was in the hotel business.
That's right.
Then he got into the equipment rental business and wound up, working in the industry. So there's a lot of people that, because the industry came here, they kind of saw opportunity in that, thought it was interesting, and moved into it. So I think it's one of the film industry is interesting in that it's one of the few industries left in this country where you don't have to have a degree to get into. You don't have to have an education. You just have to be smart. You just have to be, and you have to be willing to work hard.
Absolutely.
By smart, I don't mean super intelligent. That's not what I'm talking about. You just have to be a person that's got a lot of common sense, has a good work ethic, and is willing to start at the low end of the totem pole and work your way through it. There are many a producer in this industry, and very successful people that started out as an office PA at the copy machine.
Absolutely.
So, and they worked their way up through the business. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of directors that work their way through up to it. Writing's a little different. You have to have some skill there, writing skills, and not to say that you don't have skills to work in this industry, but it is a wide open industry as far as you deciding on what you want to do in it once you get in it. So, and that's what I tell a lot of young people that ask me about, well, did you go to film school? No, I didn't go to film school. And it's not that you have to. There's nothing wrong going to film school. It's all right to get the groundwork and understand how the industry works and all that. But more importantly is the first thing you want to do is get your first job. And you do a really good job at that, and you'll be remembered.
That is absolutely true.
Even if it's going to get coffee for the cast. I mean, you hustle. You're personable, you're on time, you do the work, you're dependable, that will stick. If you don't have that type of personality, you won't last long in this industry.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because for people that are listening that are interested in getting into the business, it's a great way to illustrate that the opportunities are there and to help them think about what they do every day. I can't tell you how many people I've brought into the business that I encountered because they were working somewhere that I stopped for a scout lunch or something. And I recognized the work ethic and their personality and the way they deal with people and solve problems. You realize that person has the potential to be a great PA and maybe long-term do more. I mean, it's kind of the way I got into the business. Steve Dirk showed up with the film crew and shot a movie at my mother's property out in Monroe, Georgia. And next thing I know, I'm being offered an opportunity to get into the film industry and change my career. But it really is, you're right. It's about showing a good work ethic and working hard.
Yes, it is. And my coordinator was a very similar situation where we filmed at her parents' house in one of the early seasons of The Walking Dead. And I had her house sit the house while her parents moved out. And of course, I wanted somebody to be there when crews came over to prep and whatnot. So she was in nursing school, and she decided, after she had seen what we do, she came to me after we finished. She said, I'd be interested in maybe doing this. And that's how, and I hired her as a PA to start with. And then now she's been my coordinator for ever since the beginning of The Walking Dead. So she was in, her family's place was in season 2 or 3. And then she's been on my crew ever since. And so it's just, again, sort of like what happened to you. You just kind of fell into it. She fell into it. So I fell into it, It's a big hole, you got.
It's a good way to put it.
If you fall into it, you know what I'm saying.
So one of the reasons I ask is because I'm always curious what, how people describe what they do to people, because there's so many unsung heroes on the set of a movie. You just watch the credit roll, and if you're not in the industry and you see this list of titles like Best Boy and Key Grip, you have no idea unless you've made a point of figuring it out. So when you are introduced to somebody in a new social setting and they find out you're in the film industry and say, what do you do? And you say location manager.
Yeah,
what is that? How do you describe the job to somebody when you're telling them what you do?
And then a lot of people have misconceptions about the fact that, okay, you're a location manager, but so all you do is ride around and find places for them to shoot in, right? That's it. Well, that's part of it, but that's just the very beginning. That's the tip of the iceberg, and then I go into explaining what else happens. So, but anyway, it's funny how like you said, nobody really knows who outside. They look at director, producer, camera, DP, camera operator, grip. People don't, and then the grip electric. But what's a grip? Question. I've probably got that 1,000 times.
Oh, absolutely.
The best boy, what does that mean? I'm going but anyway, it's interesting that we're not really I think it's become in our market now. People, I think, understand what we do.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But they certainly didn't early in the time. When I was working in the industry early, they really didn't have any clue to what it was I was doing. So.
Absolutely, yeah. No,
or what a location manager was.
Yeah, so. I mean, I know I have members of my family that still don't understand what I do. What is a location manager?
I have members of my family. I'm not sure what they do. So
that's true. When you look back at the how things have changed over the course of your career, do you feel like the job has changed a lot, or is it essentially the same job you started doing when you first got into the industry?
Oh no, it's changed a lot. I mean, it's totally different. I'm getting pretty close to being in this industry for 30 years now, so it's the transition has been a lot. I mean, it's just like when I was explaining, when John and myself did that show and it was just two of us. I don't know how we did it. We every now and then we'll get together and that'll come up and say, how did we do that? And I said, well, we did it because we worked 7 days a week. That's how we did it. Right. But anyway, it's changed so much in that you could the paperwork is enormous now. I mean, the volume of paper that you have to move through your department.
Oh gosh,
is more than quadrupled to what you were doing, what we were doing back in the early days when I got into business. I'd check requests, I do location agreements and certificates of insurance, and that was about it.
Yeah.
I mean, and, you get the permits and things like that, but now it's just, the legal issues you have to deal with, the volume of work. You could just cut a deal with a vendor. You didn't have to go through the contract phase. You could just cut a deal with some guy to come pick up the trash, and you cut him a check every week and stuff like that. You could do that kind of stuff. Now it's all much more. It's more of a business, which is what it should have been, I guess, in the beginning. But just the volume of paper that you have to move, and the safety issues that were not all that great back in the early years. I'll admit, we shot in some places that you wouldn't even think about taking a crew into today. That nobody would walk into if you. There's lots of places in Atlanta that I shot in, and that you couldn't go into these days. And that way it's changed a lot. I think that's the biggest issue. To me, it's just how much it's grown and how much more responsibility has been put on location departments. It's not about finding locations and parking the crew in a place to eat anymore. It's gone, it's way beyond that now. Again, safety is a big thing, and it's very important. No doubt about it. And I don't downplay it. I'm very safety conscious with we have to be with our crew and with places that we go into on the show. That production designers love it when they see it, and I say, well, we got to clean it up, then you can make it dirty. You can go in and put your dirt in it, but we got to get all this crap out of here. We can't put a crew in it. We got to do air quality tests. We have to check for mold. We have to check for lead paint. We have to check for asbestos. All that kind of stuff, which should have been happening in the past anyway. But the industry's evolved, not just here, but everywhere. It's evolved into this much more. People are much more aware of what issues are when you go into certain locations. And dealing with the public, obviously, has changed a good bit, especially here in this market. People are savvy, very savvy now. In the early years, not so much, but it's very few people that aren't aware of what it entails for a movie production to show up at their house or on their property or in their neighborhood. So all of that is no longer new and exciting. It's pretty much another film company coming in. So let's see what we can do. But in the permit process has gotten much more complicated. Now that you got more that all I had to do is hire cops.
Yeah, wow. That's
back in the early part. As long as I had cops on the street to help me protect our work area and to protect the public from mixing into us, that's all I really needed. But now it's a permit process. You got to jump through all these hoops with various agencies and whatnot. And all the outlying communities now in the metro area have their own office. Pardon me. Have their own office and have their permits requirements and all that. But that has changed a lot as well. And in some ways for the good, in some ways not so good. So, you want to be nimble. You have to be kind of nimble in this industry. And sometimes permits get in your way. They bog you down. It's way too easy to say no. It's much easier to say, let's see if we can work it out. But too many agencies like to say no, I think, right away. And don't want to be bothered with it, whatnot. So, but that has to be an educational thing, and it has to be supported on a local level by the municipalities and the government agencies that you come in contact with.
Over the years, you've had the opportunity to work on so many great shows, everything from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou to Sweet Home Alabama and a lot more. And you've done every single season of The Walking Dead.
That's correct.
And that's the one that most people are going to, if they look at your IMDb page, that's the one that's going to jump out. So I'm just curious, there are some shows that come along and people know this is going to be a big hit. Did they have any idea Or did you have any idea what you were getting yourselves into and how popular this show would become?
Nobody did. Nobody that was associated with that show thought it would do what it did. And that included AMC. That included the people that were producing it. Tom Luce and I, for us, it was the next gig. We had just finished working on a show together. Tom, of course, was the exec producer on the show for 9 seasons. We had just finished a show together, and we had done a TV series that went belly up on us as well and didn't even hit the air. But we had just finished a show, a thing called The Joneses. I think I had one other show I did something else in between those 2 shows. Mm-hmm. And he said, look, I got this, I've been approached to do this show about zombies, man. He says, this thing called The Walking Dead.
Right.
He said, you interested in helping me with it? And I said, sure, I'll be glad to do it. And I said, I've never even heard of it. And he said, it's based on some comics and stuff. And it's got some good people attached to it. It sounds like it's going to be interesting, but so for us, it was just the next gig. It was like, okay, it's a pilot and, 5 episodes or whatever it was. I think 5 episodes, I think it was. The pilot alone was like a feature. I mean, that thing was incredible as far as what we did in that show. And in that first pilot, it was an 18-day shoot. But it was feature quality stuff, man. We weren't messing around.
There's a couple of the locations I want to talk to you about, but I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah. Go ahead. And Frank Darabont, of course, was directing. A great guy to work with, and he was you had to keep your running shoes on with him, though, because you go on a scout with him and you look over your shoulder and he's gone. Look at where'd he go? Okay, so you better go find him. And he liked getting elevated. He liked getting above places. He was wanting to get on rooftops all the time and stuff. But you could trust what he said. He would say, okay, we'd go on the scouts and he'd say, I'm not going to see that way. I'm not going to look that way. I don't want to see that. I'm just going to look this way. Well, how many times as a location manager have you
absolutely
that?
Yeah.
And then you get there and they immediately turn the camera to where they say they weren't ever going to look.
That's right.
But in the first couple of times he did that, I didn't believe him. I said, okay, I'm not going to trust this, but we're going to go ahead and lock this down. just in case. But then it turned out to be true. And he knew what he wanted. And that's hugely important as a location manager, production designer, whatever. Yeah. When you're working with a director that knows what they want, it is so much, no matter how difficult or challenging they're asking you to do it, but they know what they want. That makes your life so much easier. Mm-hmm. When you're working for somebody that doesn't know what they want, or they won't know it till they see it, that's always a phrase that kind of made my skin crawl a little bit. It makes your job much more difficult. But anyway, it was just it was a big show, man. It was like a small feature, and not a small feature, but a full-fledged feature. And so we did a lot of stuff in that first season, and it just hit the air, and nobody had ever seen anything like it. So it just immediately went into the stratosphere, and took off. And it had a built-in fan base. So, because I had no idea how popular the comics were, and they had that built-in fan base from that. And initially, that's who was watching the first season, maybe. Not even the first season. Yeah, I would say the first season was predominantly people that were familiar with the subject matter. But then people that didn't know anything about it started hearing the buzz, and they started watching it. And that's how all of a sudden the show just took off. You had a whole second wave of people that wanted to see this show. Sure. And that's sort of been the history of it. Even though, be on the air for 10 seasons and had 11 set up to pre-production before we hit the pandemic is pretty incredible for a television show. There's obviously shows that have been out there for a long time, but it's rare to be on something that's going to run 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 seasons. You just don't know how long it's going to go. It seems to have no end to it. You mentioned the very first pilot episode, and
the feature quality of that show and what was going on there. I remember talking to people I know that worked with you on it and the challenges you guys faced. I mean, closing down blocks and blocks of downtown Atlanta to make it look like the start of the apocalypse and working the long weekends you guys did. Just unbelievable task for a pilot. I can't imagine what
it
that
was
took.
a lot. It was like I said, it was like a feature. I mean, it was like weeks of prep. That's one good thing we did have. We had a fair amount. You never have enough prep, but at least they were fair. We had time to try to make it work. We had to knock on a lot of doors. We had to communicate with a lot of people. Mm-hmm. We had the federal government involved. We had the court system involved. We had the city of Atlanta. We had MARTA. We had, just for that sequence, the tank sequence.
Yeah, exactly.
Tank sequence there in front of the federal courthouse was a whole deal, man. And the funny thing about it, I didn't think, I didn't think I said, I don't know if they're going to let me put a 60-ton tank sitting right here in front of the courthouse or not. But it turned out I had a good person in the federal government side that thought this was pretty cool. And he said, "Yeah, I think this is pretty neat." Now the thing we had to worry about to see if the street could handle the dead weight on it, but there's a lot of subterranean tunnels and whatnot underneath it. So we had to get an engineering firm come out there and do a little structural thing for us. And they said, "Yeah, it'll be fine. It's not gonna. Just don't put it over here. Put it right here." So that was the case. And then, of course, we had to get the permission from now at the federal courthouse, the judges have to sign off on this. Yeah. They have to agree to do it. If they say no, then it's a no. But fortunately, we got lucky there too. And since we presented ourselves in such a way, told them exactly what we were going to be doing. We're going to do it on a weekend. It'll be gone by Monday, because we had to go in and out of there 2 or 3 times. Yeah. We would come in on Friday night at 6 o'clock, dress the street, shoot Saturday and Sunday, come back in after we wrapped on Sunday and clean it up so that Monday it looked like we were never there. So that's how we pulled that off. So,
how many weekends did you have to do that?
I think we did that twice there. There were 2 weekends in a row that we had to go back to back on it.
Yeah.
But we had to do the exact same thing. We had to do the same, the same lockdown. And I think I had something close to 21 police officers on payroll on those 2 days, just to control the traffic flow. We had to put a helicopter in front of the MARTA station there at 5 Points on the backside, on the Broad Street side of it, I guess it is. So we had to close that entrance to the MARTA station. There's a little series of businesses that are on that particular stretch of the street. We had to get permission to shut them down. And then all the little businesses there within the fairly popular district, we had to negotiate with and shut down. And then, in a way, I think that's just sort of kick-started the big push into fairly popular after people saw that they could say, this is a good place to shoot. Now, I'd shot down in there before over the years, but nothing on that scale where we were, totally locking down 4 or 5 blocks, 6 blocks, traffic and whatnot.
Yeah, that area has really gained popularity, and it's one of those that we all now, as much as we love it, and we try not to show it just because we know what's going to be involved.
It's a love-hate thing. I mean, going in there is like, stepping into a hornet's nest. Yeah. So it's kind of like now it is. And it wasn't a whole lot different back then, although I was lucky, I guess, to be the leading edge of it, because we got out of there pretty good without having to pay too much money. But, there were 2 or 3 people in there that I always like, wherever you go, there's always somebody in there that's going to try to hold you up. But anyway, we did it. The weekend helped.
For sure.
But it turned out amazingly. It amazed me how all of a sudden Saturday and Sunday was the biggest day of the week. I was going like, yeah, this is, this guy's Saturday. I work. I'm busy on Saturday, man. Saturday, I even come in on Sunday sometimes.
Yeah,
so it was a lot of that going on. I'm going like, yeah. Well, I just drove down here last weekend, and there was nobody down here, by the way.
Right. Right.
So, but anyway.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think a lot of people that aren't in the industry don't realize that the locations department has to deal with is, we want to go into an area and film it. We want to transform it into something totally different than what it is on a day-to-day basis. We want to compensate people fairly, and we have to deal with a little bit of that, all for something that, might be on screen for, 10 minutes or so. And it can be a challenge.
If that long. That's the other thing too.
Yeah,
if it's only going to be 5 minutes of filming, you have to shut down 3 blocks to do it. But it's there's a lot that goes. That's the most complicated part of what we do, I think, is when we go into densely populated areas and have to. There's so many moving parts you got to deal with, and deliveries and special events, whatever it might be, that you have to work yourself around.
Yeah. When I think Walking Dead, the first thing that comes to mind is the city of Senoia. And I'm curious about how that relationship has developed. I mean, you go down there now, there's the Walking Dead gift store, that's the tours, there's a coffee shop selling special roasts for the different characters in the show. Talk a little bit about the development of the relationship between the show and the city of Senoia, because I know Walking Dead is a big part of it.
It is, and it's been an interesting journey, I must say. The reason we're there, which is totally ironic, and is the house that we used in season 2, the farmhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's in Senoia. Okay, that property is the back side of it is adjacent to the studio. Their back door comes into the back door of the studio through a cattle gate. So the farmhouse is why we went there to start with. We scouted different places. I did helicopter scouts, and we looked up in about a 60-mile radius of the city of Atlanta. We came across, we had a scout out helping us, Carrie Gibbs, actually Tom's wife.
Oh, I didn't know Carrie found it.
That house used to sit out on the highway. It was like you drive into Senoia, it would be one of the places you would see on the left if you're coming from Fayetteville, coming into Senoia. Well, the family that owned it, when they acquired the property, they moved that house. They moved it into the center of their 500 acres of land out there. And so you couldn't see it from the road. And so we, once we got there and we scouted, we got some photos of it, because Maida Morgan's the one, she remembers it from when she did fried green tomatoes. She said, there used to be this big old farmhouse sitting out there. And so Carrie went out there to scout it, and she went to right where Maida said it was, and it wasn't there. She said, that house is gone. You got to be kidding. So anyway, Carrie, being the good scout that she is, she did a little research and found out, it's still there. They just moved it. So anyway, she found it. And soon as Frank saw the photos, he said, this is the place. We're going to shoot it right here. We hadn't even talked to the folks yet. And he said, this is where we got to shoot it. So anyway, we went in, negotiated with them, got it done. And that's what brought us to Senoia to start with. That's also what brought our production office to that studio. So knowing what was coming up in season 3, which was the prison, Tom Luce, being the bright guy that he is, said, let's build the prison at the studio. Let's take this facade, the backside of the sound stages, put up the prison yard, guard shacks, all that stuff, and put the prison cells on the sound stages. So that's how we wound up putting the prison there. And then while we were in season 3 is when we wound up coming in contact with Woodbury. And that was the city of Senoia, which was also 10 minutes from the studio. So the next deal, at the end of season 3, we had a meeting before we shut down production and went on hiatus. Myself, Tom, and our other line producers asked for a meeting with all the businesses in the city council, and explained propose to them what we would like to do. Later in season 4. So we did, and we had everybody meet us at a public place there, a little pub there in Senoia, and we had a meeting and said, look, we're going to come back and see, we need a town that we can control, and this would be perfect, and we're going to come up with a plan that we think might work, that we can utilize the town, and y'all can still stay in business. So fortunately for us, the majority of those businesses Senoia's not a very big town. It's only got one main street and offshoots. It's about 2 city blocks long, I guess. And at the time, there was a good many empty spaces. There were some businesses there, but there were also some empty spaces there, which were helpful. But what we proposed, because most of the buildings had a back door, so what we proposed was, we're going to dress the front of your store, shut off the street access, but we'll redirect all the commercial traffic to your back door, so people can come in the back. You can stay in business. We'll shoot out on the street, and we'll pay you a monthly fee. We're going to pay you a monthly fee, whether we shoot there or not. And then on the shoot days, we'll pay you X amount of dollars for every day we shoot. So that's how we pulled it off. We would come in and dress the street, board up the window, because we didn't want people seeing what we were doing. So it worked out really well, because we were able to board up the front of the store so people couldn't look out on the street. So, but we had to create a couple of parking lots. We put up kiosks at the entry points. I had a little tent set up. We put up kiosks at the entry points to the city and directed people to the parking lot. When they got out of the car, I had a PA give them a map that said, okay, everything's open. This is how you get there. So everybody was able to stay open. The restaurants were able to stay open. The little antique shops and whatnot were able to stay open. And that's how we pulled it off. Now, when I went to the city council to propose this, the mayor was pretty skeptical that this was going to work. He said, I don't think this is going to work. But he was overruled. Fortunately, we had enough of the councilmen that were willing to vote in our behalf to let us do it. But he was very skeptical. And so once we did it and pulled it off, he came to me right at the end of it and said, you know what? I didn't think you was going to be able to do this, but y'all did a really good job of this. And he said, you really surprised me. I didn't think you was going to be able to pull this off. So, but anyway, and we couldn't do this, by the way, without the help of the local government and the people that live there.
For sure.
Now, not everybody loved us. You know, there's some folks in Senoia that wish we weren't there and whatnot. But anyway, that's how it came about, and that's how it's happened. And then, of course, we needed Alexandria for the next around season 5. I believe we started shooting in Alexandria. And we needed a little place we could wall off, and there was a community down there, a guy by the name of Scott Tigelaar, who's a developer there in Senoia, and has developed a good bit of over half, I'd say 2/3 of the town now. He's developed through the last decade or so, and his business, his company controlled that neighborhood. So we went to him and said. And he came to us. He said, you want to build Alexandria? You can build it right here. Well, at the time, the housing market wasn't doing all that great. So that worked out to our behalf. You know, we were able to put the wall around that community and seal it off. The city gave us permission to temporarily close one of the streets that went through the neighborhood and leave it closed over a period of time. We have to go back to them every year and ask for permission to keep it closed till we're done. So, and the people that lived there, because Scott worked in the film industry as well. At one point, his uncle was a guy by the name of Lombardi. He's the gentleman that owned Riverwood Studios initially, and Lombardi's family was in the special effects industry. And Scott had worked for them at one point, so he was familiar with the business. So he saw this as a good opportunity for him too. So look, we're hurting here without being able to sell any houses. Maybe we can generate a little revenue and keep afloat here. So, but he had already. If you live in that little neighborhood, it's about 12, 15 houses in there. If you live in there, in the covenant, it is stated that the property, not necessarily your property, but the property itself could be used from time to time for filming. And you're agreeing that you signed this covenant in order to live here. You're agreeing to that. So the folks that live in the neighborhood, we were, at the time, there's only 6 or 7 families. There's about 6 families in there, 7. And, of course, initially, it was a little bit of pushback by 1 or 2 of them, but we wound up being able to work out a deal with everybody. And they live there while we filmed. They live within the confines of our set. And we pay them an annual fee. And then that's how we wound up being able to put Alexandria there. So the entire show, had we not gone to that farmhouse, probably would not be in Senoia. We'd have probably been somewhere else. And then the surrounding area, Coweta County, Meriwether County, City of Griffin, Spalding County, Fayetteville.
I think that, as far as I can tell, looks like about most of that show has been filmed within 30 miles of Senoia.
We try to keep it within the zone, and that is our zone. We use the studio as a zone. We come into Atlanta occasionally. We shot up at Tyler Perry Studios for 2 seasons. We had a big setup there. And that was in the zone. It was like 29.5 miles to his front gate from our studio. So it hit within the zone. So we weren't outside the zone there. So it's been a good place for us to be for the show that we are. It's worked out very well.
Yeah. I know how challenging that show can be. I know the places you filmed. I know how hard it is to find these new locations, to create locations on the scale that you guys work. When you look back on it, is this the most challenging project you've worked on? And is it still as challenging as it was when you first started?
I think everything I had done up until I started The Walking Dead is what made me, I had the skill set when I got on the show. Now I've had to sharpen it. I mean, I've had to, expand it a good bit. But I'd already been in the industry for 20 years when I hit that show, when I hit The Walking Dead, or pretty close to 20 years. So I had I knew how I had to handle things. The thing about our job is the most important aspect, I think, of working as a location manager are your people skills. You have to be able to communicate with all types of people. People you like and people you don't like, but, you have to remain neutral when you come across somebody that you don't particularly care to have to do business with, but you got to do business with them. So let's figure out a way to make it work and put your personal feelings aside for some things. But if you cannot communicate with people, you can't work in the location department. That's one of the key things that I tell people when I put them on my crew. We are locations. We are the face of this company.
Yeah.
We're the first people. We're the first people they see.
That's right.
Okay. And we're going to be the last people they see. So if we don't put forth a good example of who we are and how we work and what we're going to do, that's not going to work very well. I've always been a person in my philosophy of doing things. I've kind of taught myself because I never worked in LA. And I've been very fortunate to be able to work my entire career from my home state, except for the couple of shows that I did out of state, like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, and a couple of shows I did up in the Carolinas. But other than that, my entire career has been right here in Atlanta. So I had to sort of teach myself how I was wanting to go about doing things. But I learned early on that, it's all about people. You got to make people feel comfortable about what you're getting ready to propose to them, and you can't candy coat it. That's a big mistake. I see that's one of the biggest mistakes I think a lot of location managers make. And they may not make them, they may be told to do that by their producer. But I've always told people the worst case scenario. And I've also told them what we're doing based on what I know, and this is what they're telling me we want to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and we're going to have to move you out of your house for 3 weeks, and we're going to take all your furniture out, and then we're going to bring it back, and if we damage it, we'll fix it. It's the same old song and dance. I don't care how you do it, and I don't care who you do it with. I don't care if it's the richest person in the city of Atlanta or the poorest. You treat them the same. And I've worked on both ends of that scale on the shows I've done. And I treat everybody the same when it comes to we're going to take care of you. And if the people I'm working for don't take care of you, I'll get it done anyway. So, and of course, if it's somebody I work with and they don't take care of what I think they should do, I don't work for them again. So it's pretty much the way I've been doing my business. But it's really about communicating with people, being honest with them, giving them all the good. This is what's going to happen now. Where I'm bringing a circus into your neighborhood. I am bringing a circus to your house. There's going to be 120 people out here, all over the place, trucks up and down the street. Your neighbors are going to get upset, but that's my job. I'm supposed to take care of that. I'm supposed to fix it. You let me worry about that, but this is what we need to do. And it doesn't matter whether it's a private residence or an office building or a farm, an industrial site, doesn't matter. It's all the same as far as the mechanics are concerned. You have to do the same thing all the way across the board. So, and that's the way I've done it. I mean, when I started lettering neighborhoods before it was required to letter neighborhoods. Early on in my career, I said, okay, I'm getting ready to bring a bunch of trucks in here and park them on the street. And if I don't tell these folks I'm coming, they're going to be upset about it. So I put a letter out, and my producer would say, why you do it? I don't tell them we're coming. I said, no, I think we should do this. I think we need to let them know we're coming. And so it turned out that was a very successful strategy to take because, first of all, they appreciated the fact that I was letting them know in advance what's going on. And secondly, it always identified who my problem was going to be. Yeah. Because whoever got that letter and they said, oh, you're going to park trucks in front of my house? No, you can't do that. You can't. I don't want you parking in front of my house or I got to work. I don't want them keeping me up late at night and all this kind of. So you had to, it helped you find the squeaky wheel. So that's something that I started doing. Now it's required permits. Yeah. You have to letter the entire city of Atlanta, or wherever you happen to be shooting. But it's the right thing to do. Yeah. You just don't show up. And it's gotten a lot easier with email. And, of course, you still have to do the physical letters in some cases. But
yeah, one of the things I'm always telling the people that I work with on our team is we should never be reactive. We should be proactive. And if we're reacting, we haven't done our homework. We weren't as prepared as we should have been, especially when you're going to go in somewhere for any kind of an extended period of time.
And one thing I've always been able to say about myself is there's not a place I've shot in I couldn't go back to.
Yeah, exactly. It's important.
There might be one out there, but and it might be that I don't want to go back there too. But I can go back to just about any place that I've ever shot and get back into it now, assuming that none of the characters have changed and you're not reinventing the wheel. But there's numerous locations in Atlanta I've shot more than once, and private homes and business places and stuff like that, because I did what I did, and the production company did what we said we would do.
Right.
And if we messed something up, we fixed it. So that's very important to do that, and to treat people with the respect that they need, that they deserve. Not that they need, but they deserve to be respected, and say, look, this is out of the ordinary. I know it's not something you're used to doing, but it'll be over. In 2 weeks will be a memory. Okay? You'll say, oh yeah, I remember that movie company coming in here. It will be a memory in 2 weeks. That's pretty much the way it works out.
It's always interesting too. You get the squeaky wheel, and then you leave town, and the next thing you know, you're getting emails from them saying, "We miss you. When are you coming back?"
Yeah, well, of course, yeah, I can see why they might say that, but yeah, I mean, it's just it's the nature of the beast, and it is a beast.
Oh yeah,
bringing film production, but it's definitely going to change now that we're moving into a new era of filmmaking. I have a feeling due to the situation at hand now. It's going to change location shooting for sure.
Oh, yeah,
I'm quite certain.
There's no doubt of that. I'm just curious. I know that when we were talking to Ilty, and I've talked to a couple of other people about similar projects, but he was working on X-Files, which at the time had this huge rabid fan base. And he talked about being out in the middle of the woods at 2 a.m. and fans popping up that had found out where they were going to be filming, and they were just waiting on them to show up and so they could see the action. And I have to imagine that with a show like The Walking Dead, you've had similar things.
Well, we've had, it's died down a good bit. I'll be honest with you. It's become less rabid. It was really hot and heavy in the first 7 seasons of the show. And then I'd say the first 7 to 8 seasons. And then it started to taper off. So it's dropped off a little bit, but there's still a very rabid fan base out there. And, but the way that we're not as open, we're not out in public as much as we used to be. We're in our controlled environments. But when we are out in public, we will get some people find us. But it's not in the early years, though. It was quite weird, because when we were shooting in, Alexandria, early in season 4, I guess it was, we were shooting at night, and a large crowd had shown up during the day. It just kept getting built. It was building, getting bigger and bigger. The word had gotten out that we were going to be filming, in the town that night. Now, we had control of it. I mean, we had it cordoned off and all of that, but we had a scene that we were behind the gate of this town that we created, so people couldn't see us. But we had a scene right at the end of the night where a truck was coming out of the gate, or I think this might have been when Michonne left. She walked out of the gate, but anyway, we had a camera out front looking back at the gate. And, we hadn't really paid much attention to it, but there were about 150 people standing outside on the back edge of the set, looking back toward the gate. And so when they opened the gate and she walked out, she kind of flipped out, because it looked like a herd of zombies standing there. The people were they didn't say a word. They did not say a word. Because the PAs had said something. PA went to them and said, look, we've got a scene here. We ask that you be very quiet and don't disrupt. And sure enough, they didn't say a word. And she said it was the weirdest feeling, or we all said that, when the gate opened and we saw those people standing there, not one of them said a thing, and they were just standing there like a big old herd of zombies. It was just the weirdest feeling. And they never got disrupted. They never did anything that got in our way. And that was just bizarre. It was just a very strange moment that we all kind of realized at that point. Said, man, this is different. This is a different show. This is a different thing here. And, we had, but then there were times too, that when they kind of get in our way, they get a little too enthusiastic, and we have good crowd control down there. We're able to keep people back.
Yeah.
But as the show has aged a little bit, that's dropped off. And summer was worse than early spring. Once school was out, then we would start seeing a lot more people because the kids would come down with their parents and stuff. But we had people from. I did a drive through Senoia one day and just wrote down the license plates, what states and whatnot. There were 21 different states of license plates parked on the street in Senoia. Now, we were filming in Alexandria, so the town was open. But they can't see into Alexandria either. There were 21 different states represented of people parking on the street there.
Really? Wow. Well, I know that the city has changed quite a bit and really embraced The Walking Dead since then, because I've scouted it for other things before and since, and seeing what's going on there with the tours and the shops and the coffee shop and all of the things we mentioned earlier. It's just crazy.
Well, and this is sort of like what I was talking about with Invasion USA. What this did, and people say, well, it's because Walking Dead did so much for this town. We really didn't do that. I mean, we did and we didn't. But what we did do is put them on the map. Mm-hmm. People wanted to check out Senoia and see, okay, what's going on down there? So what has happened from that is that a lot of people come down there maybe initially just out of curiosity, but then they see, oh, this is kind of a cool little place. Maybe we'll come down here again. It's drawn attention to them.
Sure.
And it's allowed them, up until the pandemic hit, it allowed them to have a growth in the number of small businesses that were there, that weren't there. I mean, there's not an empty. When we first got there, on a Wednesday afternoon, you could fire a cannon down the street and not hit a car. And now there's hardly a day of the week you can't go down there that you could not, that's not full. That every parking space on the street is full. And that's not all us. I mean, we may have brought the attention to the town, but that they're not coming. All those people aren't coming down there to see The Walking Dead. They're coming down there because they want to eat lunch at one of the nice restaurants, or maybe do a little shopping at one of the boutiques, get their hair cut, get their bicycle worked on. Maybe go on the tour. It's just, and maybe go to the Walking Dead store. Some people might come down there specifically for that, but it's just, and then the housing market in there has gone crazy.
Yeah,
I mean, they've just built. They have, I think they were named the most wealthiest community in the city of Georgia, in the state of Georgia, year before last, per capita income. Based on, that number. But there's houses in there now selling $400,000 or more. And they weren't there 10 years ago.
Oh, no, absolutely not. No.
And it's...
like I said, I think the last time I scouted there was before you guys had become established. And there were a lot of empty storefronts and, a lot of empty houses and nothing new going on.
No. The first time I saw Senoia was when I was scouting with the Driving Miss Daisy people. Mm-hmm. And because they shot a scene there. And it was just a little old, it had a hardware store and maybe a restaurant or two in there. I don't know. But it wasn't much happening. It was pretty much a little spot in the road with not a lot of activity going on.
And thanks again for joining us on Locations on 2, the podcast taking you around the world and behind the scenes with some of your favorite television shows, movies, and commercial projects through the location managers that make it happen. You can find other episodes at locationson2.com or anywhere that you get your other favorite podcasts. This is Dodd Vickers, and you can find me online at doddvickers.com. Locations on 2 is brought to you by the Location Managers Guild International. Visit them online and find out more by visiting locationmanagers.org. Until next time, I'm switching back to Channel 1.